Hey everyone, it's Nicole here today with a floral design card featuring no line coloring with Polychromos colored pencils. I have been a huge colored pencil fan for years, and I tend to go in phases where I'll use one coloring medium and then another, but I generally love to just kind of come back to colored pencils because I absolutely love them. Something that is a little bit newer to me that I have not always done in the past, and I have tried it a few times here and there, is no line coloring with whatever medium it might be. I tend to find I have my best luck with colored pencils. At least what I like, how it turns out the best, is with colored pencils. I am coloring on some craft cardstock. This is also one of my other very favorite looks with colored pencils just in general, whether it be no line coloring or not. But I think florals are especially beautiful with no line coloring. Plus, you can kind of let go of perfection a little bit with this, I think. Now, the outline here was stamped with Simon Says Stamp Barely Beige ink. It does seem a little dark right now. This is a dye ink, so it is going to fade. And it fades quite a bit and quite quickly. It's part of the reason I stamped mostly just one image at a time so that I could still kind of see all of the elements while I was coloring and then kind of trace over the petals with my darkest color I'm using, the inside of the flower, things like that. I wanted to be able to still kind of see them, even though, as I mentioned, it's forgiving and you don't have to color exactly. My other very favorite tip when coloring, especially on craft cardstock, is coloring in what the section you're going to color with white first and then blending over it with your darker colors. So I use two colors of yellow for the petals and then white. And any of the colors I'm using are shown across the bottom of the screen so that you know exactly what I used. And I worked quite hard on this first flower. It's always kind of, just seeing what works the best. I am going to share a little bit of coloring some of the rest of the images. However, most of them are going to be colored off screen because all of the flowers are colored exactly the same. Let's move on to this leaf. I wanted my leaves to really be a bright green, so I picked a couple of colors of green, traced the leaf first. I don't want to lose the veins of the leaf. Then with my darkest color. Then I added white, and then I'm going to add in my dark color again around that outside edge of the leaf, blend with my lighter color, and then go over the whole thing again with white. And that's going to give me this beautiful, beautiful leaf. I love how these turned out. I love the green with the yellow. Very bright and fun. So let's go ahead and color another one here. And like I mentioned, then the rest of the images I'm going to stamp and go color off camera to save a little bit of time because they are all going to be colored with these colors shown across the bottom of the screen. And I also want to mention I like to keep my pencil sharpener handy. The sharper the pencils are, the easier it is to color. A good pencil sharpener when you color with colored pencils is just gold. It's so fantastic to have. I always keep it right there because I'm constantly sharpening my pencils. Especially any little detail work, the sharper your pencil is, the happier you will be with the results. You can see just adding a tiny bit of orange in the center of that flower, giving that illusion a little bit. Lots of blending. You could even use Gamsol if you wanted to blend this out. I don't really think you need it, especially when you give a nice white base like this and maybe color over the top with white then to finish off. It tends to help blend everything out, and I like those pencil lines in my petals of my flowers, so I don't want to lose that. Now you can see I've taken the Coordinating Spring Blossoms dies, and I am die cutting all of my flowers and leaves with those coordinating dies. Look how pretty these all look. This no line coloring, I am a huge fan of it. I don't always watch a ton of videos, but no-line coloring videos are one of those that I will stop and watch almost every single time because I am just completely fascinated with the whole technique. And I want to do better, so I just need to keep practicing. As with anything, the more you practice, the better you get at it. And that is really one of my goals, is to get better at no-line coloring. I hope that this inspires you a little bit to maybe try it with your colored pencils. I know I have a ton of you out there who love colored pencils like I do, and I really do think that they're very forgiving with this technique. Now I've got a piece of A2 sized 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch Desert Storm craft cardstock from Neenah. And I am going to stamp those same flowers and leaves. In fact, I think I ended up using every image from the Spring Blossom stamp set on this to create a pattern background. I could have just kept my background white. I could have kept my background craft, just plain. But I thought it would be fun to create my own pattern background with these flowers and leaves, stamping them with this water mark based ink. This is a clear embossing ink. Now you could leave it just like this if you wanted to, and it's going to, as it dries, it'll just have a subtle tone on tone background, I guess I want to say. Or you can do what I'm going to do here today, and I'm going to add gold embossing powder to this for a little bit of an elegant look. Part of the reason I picked gold embossing powder is I am going to be die cutting my sentiment from gold metallic paper cardstock, and I think it helps draw that gold out of the background. Once I have this all filled in, I'm going to grab my gold embossing powder and just sprinkle this all over. It can be a little tricky to tell where you have embossed when embossing on gold on craft like this. So just I like to hold it at an angle. Make sure your heat tool is good and hot. I held it out to the side, heating up for about 30 seconds before taking it to my paper. And I'm going to continuously hit both the front and the back of my panel to help with warping. But as it turns shiny, you'll be able to see where you have melted that embossing powder. Now I could leave my background the size it is and just adhere the whole thing to an A2 size card base, but I think because I'm going to be die cutting the shadow for my sentiment from foam adhesive, or white cardstock rather, that's been attached to foam adhesive, I think I want a white border all the way around the card because that's going to tie into that white outline for the sentiment really nicely. Let's grab the largest A2 double stitched frame die from Honeybee and die cut this out, and we're just going to discard the frame. Sometimes I think it's kind of fun to keep it, but like I mentioned, we want the white frame. It's going to have stitching on the outer edge or the inner, so it still has that great stitching detail. And then we just need to figure out, do we want a landscape style card? Do we want a portrait? I really thought I wanted portrait. I have already die cut my sentiments here. I did that off camera. As I mentioned, the Love You is the actual sentiment is die cut from gold cardstock. The outline was die cut from white cardstock that's been attached to fun foam, so it's going to be popped up a little bit, which I really like. We're going to adhere our pattern paper background to the card, and then before I attach anything, I want to lay everything out and kind of see how the placement's going to go before I commit to where I'm going to put everything. And then I'm going to go ahead and start with my largest flower. I always like to start with the largest image or whatever it might be, and we're going to pop that with foam adhesive because I think that little bit of dimension helps make that flower really stand out. We also want to make sure before we get too many of the images adhered to the card that we have left room for that sentiment, because it does take up a little bit of room. In fact, my sentiment's going to be at the top half of the card and all the floral embellishment on the bottom half, and that beautiful gold embossed floral background is going to tie it all together. I'm going to take some Ranger Multi Matte Medium on the back of my words and glue them in place onto that outline. And just lay something heavy on top like an acrylic block to hold that in place. And then I'm going to play with my flowers a little bit and see the placement I like. But I also need to, again, make sure that I have left enough room. So let's go ahead and attach the word you, because I know that part of this needs to be tucked under the flower. And from there, I can make sure that I am not covering up my sentiment with the rest of my design. Some of the leaves I'm going to attach directly to the background, and some I will attach with foam adhesive. It just depends on, where everything falls on the card. Same goes for some of the flowers. Most of the things are popped up, but I think it looks a lot more natural when some of the elements are popped up and some are not. I also want to make sure none of the foam adhesive overlaps other pieces with foam adhesive because it doesn't lay flat that way. So let's get this next flower put in place. And I'm really concerned about this flower I'm attaching now. I did not want it to be too high so that it covered up the U, but I also want it to really show up because I think the design is a little bit different than the other flowers, and I love that about it. Let's glue the word love onto our outline. I'm using my Tool-in-One from Spellbinders to kind of move that around, and then I can put my acrylic block on top to hold that down while the glue dries. And then I just need to figure out where the rest of my images go. And I had to kind of play around with this a little bit. These scrapbook adhesives, foam adhesive squares, are my favorite. They come in 2 sizes. They also come in white or black. So depending on what kind of card you're making, sometimes if I'm doing a dark card base, I like to use the black ones because they're from the side you see black instead of white, but I use white a ton. Just 2 really good options, and these are my very favorite foam adhesive squares. Once I have everything down where it's going to go, I'm going to flip it over and trim off any of the excess. And I noticed that I forgot to attach one of the leaves. I think I even forgot to attach that one flower. I don't know how it stayed in place, but I'll just come back and add a little glue to that in a little bit. I can put the word love then down onto my card. And at this point, if you want to be finished, the card is beautiful. Those Polychromos colored flowers are gorgeous, a nice simple sentiment. And you can finish it off with sequins like I'm going to do here, jewels. I'm using some of those as well. If you wanted to, Nuvo crystal drops would be another fun option. I use those a lot. I think those are fantastic. Just some little bits of sparkle and fun that you can put throughout the card. I even just glued down that last flower, and I used liquid adhesive since I'd already trimmed it. That was really easy to do that. A jewel picker makes picking up anything little like this so much easier, keeps your fingers out of the way. I highly recommend it. I'm doing a scattering of my embellishments, so there's a lot kind of near the top of the card, where the sentiment is basically at the top of the card and all of the color is at the bottom half. This brings a little of the color up into the upper half of the card. Without overwhelming anything, add some nice sparkle, but I'm also adding some down below, even layering some over my colored images to finish it all off. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for this no-line coloring with Polychromos Spring Blossoms card featuring honeybee stamps and dies. The supplies I used to create my card are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more cards featuring honeybee stamps that you might be interested in. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.